There comes a moment in every dog owner's life when love demands courage. And for me, that moment arrived the day my vet gently mentioned the word neutering. It sounded so sterile, so cold, so utterly detached from the warmth of the little creature sleeping beside me. My Shih Tzu, small enough to fit into my arms, soft as a dandelion puff, was the heartbeat of my house, the tiny ruler of my days. And the idea of him on an operating table, surrounded by gloved hands and gleaming instruments, filled me with a fear I could barely admit out loud. I remember sitting on the edge of the exam room chair, nodding as the vet explained in calm, measured tones what the surgery involved. "It's a simple procedure," she said. "It helps reduce hormone-driven behavior and keeps them healthier in the long run." I nodded again, but my heart was racing. Love, I realized, sometimes feels like agreeing to something your mind understands, but your heart can't quite bear. That night, as I sat cross-legged on the floor with him asleep across my lap, I watched his chest rise and fall in steady rhythm. The quiet hum of the air conditioner filled the room, and I thought about all the small ways he'd already changed me. He came into my life as a 4-month-old ball of fluff, all mischief and trust. And in just a few months, he'd turned my orderly world upside down. He was bold, stubborn, endlessly curious, sniffing every corner, chasing invisible enemies, barking at his own reflection as if it were a rival intruder. He had this unshakable confidence, the kind only Shih Tzus seemed to have. A sense that he was not a pet, but a tiny monarch presiding over his loyal human subjects. But with that confidence came chaos. He marked every new rug as if declaring ownership, jumped on guests without hesitation, and occasionally turned my living room into a battleground of territorial pride. It was funny, yes, but it was also exhausting. The vet's words echoed again. It will help him calm down. He'll still be the same dog, just easier to live with. I wanted to believe her. The morning of the surgery felt colder than usual, though maybe it was just my nerves. I remember wrapping him in his little blue blanket, the one that still smelled faintly of baby shampoo and home, and whispering into his ear that everything would be okay. He tilted his head at me, those round eyes glimmering with trust, and I felt the sharp sting of guilt crawl up my throat. How do you explain to a creature that adores you completely that you're about to hand him over to strangers for something he'll never understand? Love often demands a kind of silence that hurts the silence of doing what's right when it feels wrong. As we drove to the clinic, he sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window as if the world was an endless adventure. I envied that innocence. When the vet took him from my arms, I forced myself to smile, even though my chest felt hollow. The waiting room was filled with the usual soundtrack of quiet murmurs and nervous laughter, but I couldn't focus on any of it. Every second stretched like an hour. I stared at the clock until the hands blurred, my mind spinning through every possibility, every irrational fear. I remembered stories of dogs who never woke up, of complications, of heartbreaks that arrived too soon. It's funny how love makes your imagination cruel. When the door finally opened and the vet called my name, my knees almost gave out from the relief that flooded through me. "It went perfectly," she said, smiling. "He's a bit groggy, but he'll be just fine." Seeing him afterward broke me a little. He was small to begin with, but in that moment, he looked impossibly fragile, half asleep. His fur ruffled. A tiny bandage wrapped around his leg, where the IV had been. I touched his paw gently, and his head lifted just enough for him to nuzzle my hand before sinking back into the blanket. That faint, sleepy movement said everything. Trust. Forgiveness. Love without question. Dogs have this way of forgiving us for things they never understood in the first place, as if their hearts are made of something purer than our own. I took him home that evening, cradled like something sacred, whispering promises I wasn't sure he even needed to hear. The first night was quiet, and the house felt different. He lay beside me on the couch, half awake, half dreaming, his breathing shallow but steady. I watched the rise and fall of his little body and realized how deeply his presence anchored me. Every sound, every sigh, every twitch of his paw pulled me back to the simple truth that love is responsibility, dressed in tenderness. He didn't know why he hurt. He just knew that I was there. And somehow, that was enough. As the night stretched on, I sat in the dim light of the living room, running my fingers through his fur, promising myself that this was the right choice, even if it felt heavy now. By morning, he was already trying to stand, wobbling a little, determined to walk, despite the sleepy haze of anesthesia still in his veins. There was something heartbreakingly brave about it, how life just keeps moving forward. Even when it stumbles, he looked up at me, tail wagging weakly, eyes shining with that same unshakable trust. And in that moment, I understood something simple but profound. Neutering wasn't about taking anything away from him. It was about giving him a chance to live longer, calmer, and safer. It was about protecting him from the invisible battles his instincts would otherwise lead him into. When I carried him out to the garden later that day, he sniffed the air as if seeing the world for the first time again. The sunlight caught in his fur, soft and golden, and I couldn't help but smile. The fear I'd carried for weeks began to dissolve into quiet gratitude. I realized that this was what love looked like in real life, not the picture-perfect kind from movies or books, but the kind that shows up at the vet's office, waits through the silence, and holds a trembling body through the night. Love, in its truest form, is not just affection, it's endurance. By the end of that long, emotional day, he was asleep beside me again, curled into a perfect little circle of trust. His breathing was deep, and even now, the kind of peace that only dogs seem to master. I brushed a stray lock of fur from his eyes and whispered softly, "You're still my boy." Because he was, and always would be. The surgery might have changed something inside his body, but it hadn't touched the thing that mattered most. His soul, the part of him that loved unconditionally, forgave instantly, and trusted me completely. And as I sat there listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing, I realized that maybe this wasn't just a new chapter for him, it was one for both of us. Written in quiet courage and the kind of love that never needs to be spoken aloud, the days that followed felt like living in a quiet kind of miracle. The chaos that used to swirl around the house, the racing paws across the floor, the sudden bursts of barking, the constant need to mark every inch of furniture had softened into something gentler, slower, more peaceful. It didn't happen overnight. Of course, the first week, he still had flashes of his old wild energy. Moments when he'd grab his toy and run in circles until he stumbled from his own excitement, but those moments were fewer now. Like passing clouds in an otherwise clear sky. Most of the time, he was content just to be near me, to sit on the rug and watch the world with quiet curiosity instead of trying to conquer it. I hadn't realized how much his restless energy had filled the house until it began to fade, replaced by a calm, so tender it felt like a new kind of music, steady, slow, and strangely comforting. In those weeks, I began to notice the small changes first, the way he no longer barked at every sound outside, The way he'd nap in pools of sunlight for hours, instead of pacing by the door, waiting for something exciting to happen. He still followed me everywhere. Of course, that would never change, but his following had softened too. It wasn't the desperate, puppy-like need to be in constant motion. It was quieter now, more like a silent companionship. He'd pad after me into the kitchen, settle by my feet, and simply watch. When I worked, he no longer demanded attention every few minutes. He'd curl up near my chair, eyes half closed, tail occasionally flicking in sleepy rhythm. The house that once echoed with his joyful chaos now breathed in sync with him, calm and unhurried. It's funny how you don't realize what you've been living with until it's gone. Before the surgery, I'd gotten used to cleaning up the little accidents of his marking tiny stains on rugs, faint smells that no amount of detergent could truly erase. I thought it was just part of having a male dog. But as the weeks passed, those little frustrations quietly disappeared. He stopped lifting his leg indoors, stopped claiming corners as his kingdom. It was as if his world had shrunk in the best possible way, from needing to dominate everything around him to simply belonging within it. One afternoon, I caught him lying near the couch, eyes half closed, completely relaxed. That used to be one of his favorite spots to mark. And now he just rested there peacefully, as though he'd finally made peace with the space and maybe, in some way, with himself. Of course, there were moments when I missed his wildness, the sudden bursts of energy that made the house feel alive. Sometimes, I'd look at his toys sitting untouched in the corner and feel a strange ache of nostalgia. But then he'd come over, curl up against my leg, and sigh that soft, contented sigh that only dogs can make, a sound that says everything words never could. And I'd remember that calm can be its own kind of joy. It's not loud or dramatic, it's quiet and steady, like the warmth of a lamp in a dark room. I started to see that neutering hadn't taken anything away from him. It had simply peeled back the layer of frantic instinct that once ruled his little body and left behind something truer: his gentle heart, his steady affection. The part of him that had always been there beneath the noise. He was still playful, still mischievous, still full of personality. But now it all came without the edge of tension. When he looked at me, there was a softness in his gaze that hadn't been there before. A quiet certainty that said, "I'm safe now." And maybe that's what I had been chasing all along, not just calmness for him, but for both of us. Because living with a dog like a Shih Tzu is like living with a mirror. Their energy becomes your own. Their moods ripple into you without permission. When he was restless, I was restless. When he calmed, I did too. Our days grew slower together, our nights keener, our bond deeper. I learned that love doesn't always bloom in moments of excitement. Sometimes it grows best in silence, in those still hours when nothing dramatic happens. When the only sound is the soft breathing of a tiny creature who trusts you completely. By the end of that second month, I found myself smiling at how our rhythm had changed. The house no longer felt like a playground, it felt like a home. He still followed me everywhere, still greeted me with his trademark wagging tail, still made me laugh in the smallest ways. But now, our days unfolded with a calm patience, like two souls who had finally found the same pace. And in that gentle quiet, I realized something profound. Love doesn't need to be loud to be strong. Sometimes, it's at its truest when it simply stays steady, soft, and endlessly present. Somewhere in the quiet that followed, something began to change, not just in him, but in me. I used to think neutering was a practical decision, a simple act of responsibility. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized it had reshaped the rhythm of our hearts. My Shih Tzu had always been loving in his own dramatic way, bounding onto my lap without warning, pawing at my face if I dared to look at my phone too long, demanding the full theater of my attention. After the surgery, that intensity softened. The love didn't fade, it deepened. It was no longer wild or frantic. It became steady and sure, like a river that had learned to flow quietly instead of crashing through stones. He no longer needed to prove himself through energy or noise. He simply existed beside me. Confident in the invisible bond that tethered us together, I began to see it in the smallest gestures, the way he would lift his head when I entered the room. Not to jump or bark, but simply to look, as though to say, "There you are." The way he'd curl against my side at night, no longer restless, no longer needing to chase shadows or defend invisible kingdoms. He had grown comfortable in his stillness, and that comfort taught me something about love. It doesn't always live in motion. Sometimes, it lives in the quiet moments between heartbeats, in the shared silence where trust replaces words. There were moments, too, when his new calmness revealed the parts of myself I hadn't noticed before. I no longer rushed through my mornings, no longer saw our walks as tasks to check off a list. Instead, I began to match his pace slow, curious, present. We stopped more often, letting him sniff the same tree or follow a drifting leaf. And every time he looked up at me, I could almost feel the unspoken gratitude in his gaze, as if he understood that we were both learning how to be still. His gentleness began to ripple into other parts of my life as well. I found myself speaking softer, laughing easier, worrying less. There was something grounding about living beside a creature who loved so completely and so quietly, who asked for nothing but your nearness. His small acts of affection, the soft nudge of his nose against my hand, the way he'd rest his chin on my knee when I worked, became daily reminders that peace isn't found in the absence of noise, but in the presence of connection. Looking back now, I think neutering didn't just calm his body, it freed his heart. And in some strange way, it freed mine too. We both stopped chasing what we didn't need, the restlessness, the performance, the noise. What remained was something simple and pure, a companionship that no longer needed to prove its worth. Just two souls sharing the same quiet space, breathing the same peace, perfectly content in the gentle rhythm of being together. It's strange how love can turn into comfort so easily, and how comfort, if left unchecked, it can quietly turn into laziness. After the first few peaceful months, my little Shih Tzu began to change again, but this time, not in spirit, in size. I still remember the day I noticed his collar felt a bit tighter, his steps a little slower, his once trim belly now swaying like a tiny pendulum when he walked. At first, I laughed it off, calling him my little dumpling. But deep down, I knew it was my fault. I had mistaken his pleading eyes for hunger, and his gentle sighs for sadness. And so I fed him love in the form of treats. Every time he looked at me, I saw gratitude, but I also saw trust, the kind that believes you'll always know what's best. And it hurt to realize I hadn't. Neutering had made him calmer. Yes, but it had also made him less active. The endless running and jumping that used to keep his body trim were gone, replaced by long naps and contented lounging on the couch. He seemed so happy that I couldn't bring myself to say no when he pawed at the snack jar or stared longingly at my dinner plate. It felt harmless, a bite here, a nibble there, until one afternoon, as I watched him struggle to climb onto the sofa, something inside me sank. His little body, once agile and proud, now moved with effort. I realized love sometimes means resisting what feels kind in the moment for the sake of what's right in the long run. So we began again. Slowly. Smaller portions. Longer walks. Fewer snacks. The first few days were rough. He'd sit by the kitchen, eyes wide with disbelief, tail wagging in hopeful confusion. I'd try to explain, my voice soft and apologetic, as though he could understand. It's for your health, buddy. He'd tilt his head, sigh dramatically, and curl up by the door, clearly unimpressed. But little by little, our rhythm changed again. The walks became adventures once more. The park rediscovered through his tiny, determined steps. He panted easily at first. But then, as the weeks went by, his energy began to return. One evening, he ran ahead of me for the first time in months. Tail high, ears bouncing in rhythm with his stride. I laughed out loud, realizing how much I had missed that sight. And the weight he'd carried wasn't just physical, it was symbolic of something we both shared: the comfort of routine, the temptation of ease. Love, I learned, isn't just warmth and indulgence. It's discipline disguised as care. It's saying no to another treat. Yes, to another walk. And meaning both with equal tenderness. Watching him shed those extra pounds felt like watching both of us grow lighter, less burdened, more alive. By the time his collar fit snug again, I realized that maybe what we had gained from this journey wasn't just health or balance, it was a deeper understanding of what love really asks of us, not just to adore, but to guide, protect, and sometimes gently say, enough. Months passed. And with them, the last traces of my old fears melted away. The restless energy that once filled our home had been replaced by something softer, a steady rhythm, like the quiet hum of a heart that finally knew peace. My Shih Tzu was no longer the wild little storm that used to race through hallways, knocking over slippers and scattering toys. He had become calm, thoughtful, almost meditative in his own small way. Sometimes, I'd catch him sitting by the window, his fur glowing gold in the afternoon light, eyes following the drifting leaves outside. There was a kind of wisdom in that stillness, as though he had finally discovered the secret to being content. And in truth, so had I. People often ask whether neutering changes a dog's personality, and I always smile because the answer isn't simple. It doesn't change who they are. It reveals who they've always been beneath the noise. My Shih Tzu didn't lose his spark. He just stopped burning so wildly. He still greeted me at the door with that same joy. Still curled up beside me every night. Still pressed his nose against my hand as if to say, I'm yours. The difference was in the quiet confidence of his love. Before, it had been loud and messy, leaps and licks and endless energy, but now it was gentle, patient, and deep, like a warmth that lingered long after the fire had burned low. Sometimes, when I looked at him sleeping, his tiny body curled into a perfect circle, his breathing slow, and even I found myself wondering if dogs feel pride the way we do. Because there was something almost dignified about him now. Something steady in the way he carried himself. He no longer barked for attention or fought invisible rivals for space. He simply existed. Fully and peacefully. And maybe that's what growing up means. Even for a dog to stop chasing every noise and start listening to the quiet. I often think back to that anxious morning at the vet, when I worried that I might be taking something essential away from him. I didn't understand then that what I was really giving him was freedom, the freedom to live without the restless pull of hormones. without the invisible tension that had made his small body feel bigger than it should. What remained was the essence of him, the love, the trust, the pure, unfiltered joy that had drawn me to him in the first place. Now, when he curls against me at night, his warmth pressed against my chest, I sometimes whisper, "You're still my boy," and he'll lift his head slightly, blink once, as if to acknowledge the truth of it, then drift back into sleep. There's something sacred in that moment. In the quiet proof that love doesn't fade when life changes, it deepens, it matures. It learns to breathe in slower rhythms. He is the same soul, only quieter now. And somehow, that quiet feels louder than all the chaos that came before. Living with him has taught me that real love isn't measured by excitement or noise or motion. It's measured by presence. It's in the silent companionship of two beings who have weathered change together and come out gentler, wiser, and more at peace. He is still my shadow. Still my heartbeat in fur. Still the small, steadfast life that fills my days with warmth. And as he lies beside me now, I realize that neutering didn't change his spirit. It simply gave him room to grow into the truest version of himself. And maybe, in loving him through it, I did too.